Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe this video for more content on any of your alternative football favorites. Now, on to the show. Joining me today, I have a special guest and recent member of the Gridiron Gallery podcast that I'm glad to have reconvene with me several months later. And now at the conclusion of the CFL, XFL talks, it is Justin Dunk of DownNation. Justin, good to have you on the show. I know I led in with that point, but it is technically I'm leading in here with the end of those talks. First off, though, how have you been last few months? Obviously, you guys have been covering a lot of what's going on behind the scenes, but also now you get to at least talk and cover the lead up to a actual season again. That's got to be exciting.
It's awesome, man, to be talking about football and not COVID-19 protocols. So right. Thankfully, I've stayed away from the virus, and the numbers up in Canada, and especially where I am in the GTHA, we call it the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, have gone down. And that's allowed for Canadian football to return, which everyone up here loves. And I'm sure a number of people down in the United States as well. So to actually have football content on the site instead of protocols and politicians and government talk and all that kind of stuff is a welcome change.
Right. It's been a lot more positivity lately. Actually, as of today's recording, Winnipeg just confirmed that you guys wrote this too, that they can have full capacity at their stadium as well. That was great to read today. I was really happy. A lot of numbers are going the right direction. So just positive articles, pieces, and more news that the CFL is getting geared up for that August 5th launch and that rematch of the 107th Grey Cup. Before we get into that, because I do want to talk kickoff, because I want to hear about the season. I'm definitely more getting invested in wanting to, get into this first season myself, being really involved with talking CFL content. We got to wrap up a few loose ends that I've been wanting to bring up with you. Obviously, as I mentioned when we let in there, the XFL and CFL, they wrapped up their talks. I've already had a discussion with Dave Naylor on this show about that said point. But I really want to get a quick thoughts from yourself, because you and I had a bit of a talking about this previously about these discussions. We didn't know much. Obviously, NDAs later on came out, and they were pretty much showing that they did not want anything released out there. But they kind of ended, and it's looking like they're just on their separate ways, but there's still pieces and bits of lingering info that might affect the leagues moving forward. I mean, what are you getting? What are your thoughts on this? Where do you make of at least the ending of how this concluded?
Yeah, so I'll touch on that partnership part first and then end it with some XFL sources that have been talking to former employees. So first of all, on the CFL, XFL part, to me, the major hurdle that they had to first clear was, what was a business partnership going to look like? And business for me is just a fancy word for money, right? You're essentially talking about how the revenue is going to be chopped up. And people well know in Canada and a bunch in the United States know this as well, that there are teams in the CFL that lose millions of dollars each year. Toronto, the city that a lot of people in the United States know, the Argonauts lose multiple millions of dollars each year. They obviously want to change that, and it's possible with single game sports betting being legalized. But when you're talking about that and you have these franchises that are losing money, unless the XFL was going to completely change the financial landscape for those teams that were losing money, and every team in the CFL overall, it never really made sense to me that the partnership was going to happen right away unless that big fat check was going to come in to the CFL owners' coffers, because they've been with these teams for a long time and they want to see it turn a profit. I mean, there are teams that do, don't get me wrong, but the teams at the bottom really want to try to change that quickly. So overall, it didn't surprise me that these talks were shelved for now, because the CFL wants the focus to be on the football field in the 2021 season. I'll give you an example. I asked for the commissioner, Randy Ambrosie, and I had him on the day the league made it official and said that they were in talks with the XFL. And he shared some of his time with me, about 15 or 20 minutes. But on the day that they announced that they were, let's say, put on hold for this time, Ambrosie was not made available. I was told his schedule was full. So to me, that shows that the CFL, at least the head office, wants the focus to be on football. And the one other note I'll add on the XFL side, I've talked to some people in the player personnel realm, and they've said that there's people that were involved in XFL 2020 that got on the field that, and there's a few of them, don't necessarily feel like the league will ever even get back to playing football. Now, they've announced that they're going to work towards that and they plan to play in 2023, but there are people that are still largely skeptical of that. So that's led some CFL people to say, hey, well, what did the XFL really have to offer if there's a chance that they maybe never even play again? And I'd love to be proven wrong, but I'm just really being the messenger here and relaying what people are saying behind the scenes.
Right. And I'll give a response to that just because, look, this is a piece that's kind of been brought up, is that, you know, some of our outlets, you know, even ourselves at Newsroom, we've had that conversation like, hey, this, I mean, it's there. It's not saying that it's at the forefront, but, you know, what if that does happen? Obviously delaying to 2023 didn't help that. I will say myself, I still have a good faith in the ownership that has it. You know, I know that there's that possibility. I'm not completely on the part maybe yet where I'm 100% on there that maybe it might not happen. Now I know your sources said that, and we got to look at both these ways of what it could be. So I bring that up, and that's not the first time I've heard that, by the way. So this isn't blindsiding me. It's just that, you know, I do hold yet that they are building that way. But obviously they got to show some evidence and proof. That's what I'm waiting on and others waiting on. Let's see at least what's been behind the scenes, what you're doing. So I'm looking out of that. And, you know, obviously it keeps being brought up that, you know, we're wondering what this could be still, because as it's been brought up recently, the Argos aren't completely out of the woods with this XFL conversation, at least according to Dan Rolfe of the Canadian Press, which actually he's going to be on another show this week that's going to be apparently bringing a few points to light. I will listen into that one. However, he's been talking that the Argos might look to move on from the CFL. It's a rumor right now, but it's one that apparently to him has legs. I don't know if there's that much to it. I have some concerns on it. Do you see them at least going that extreme and saying, well, we talked to the XFL, let's move on. These guys have what we want?
It lines up with their other properties. And by what I mean with that is the Toronto Raptors are a part of obviously a largely American league. They're the only Canadian team there. The Toronto Maple Leafs are one of, you know, a handful of Canadian teams, but largely a US based league in the NHL. So it would make sense that MLSE, who own both the Leafs and the Raptors, would look at an idea like that, at least because they feel like that's a way to turn their losing business with the Argos potentially into a revenue generator that is actually net positive for Maple Leaf sports and entertainment overall. And I had heard behind the scenes, and a lot of it was more rumors than anything, but that Larry Tannenbaum, who is the chair of the board of directors at MLSE and is the largest individual shareholder of the company that essentially just prints money in Canada, he really wants to leave his legacy of bringing an NFL team to Toronto. And to me, this notion of the Argos maybe joining the XFL sort of shows you that idea a little bit, because the XFL is going to play 4-down football. And maybe the Argos feel like that is the way to get an NFL team here and build a little bit of a foundation. It's not the NFL, it's the XFL. But if you start getting people used to 4-down football in that brand, and I'm just going sort of off the beaten path here a little bit, but maybe the Toronto Argos turn into the NFL team at some point that Larry Tannenbaum covets, because he's won a championship with the Raptors. The Major League Soccer championship has been won by the Toronto FC. The Toronto Maple Leafs probably won't ever win a Stanley Cup in his lifetime because they're cursed. But really, the only thing that he has left that he wants to do with his legacy in the city is bring an NFL team here. And it's been well known, especially in Canada, that there were plans to demolish the Rogers Centre. So a lot of people say, well, there's no NFL stadium up there. But behind the scenes, there were whispers that in those new plans where the Blue Jays were going to build a brand new water park, or waterfront park, I should say. Now, those were just plans. Nothing's been concrete yet. That there would have been a possibility there that you could have done what some of the American cities have done. Like, you know, Pittsburgh comes to mind for me, right? You have Heinz Field right next to Three Rivers Stadium, I think was the old one. PNC Park is the new one. So you had them right close to each other. So you could do something like that in Toronto. That's a roundabout way of talking about a lot of rumors, but it does line up with the MLSE team that they have right now and with where Larry Tannenbaum wants to go in terms of getting that American market share with the XFL and potentially down the line, the NFL.
Mm-hmm. And I'll specify this next point to follow up. It continues like to be on the speculation path, because I want to specify this is, if we're going to talk this, it is right now heavy rumor, has potential legs, but it makes me curious because, MLSE had been talked this entire time. They were the most bullish team on these talks. So, hearing that they also might be potentially thinking, well, maybe 2022, 2023, we decide let's look at an opportunity elsewhere and maybe get towards profitability. It does make me wonder. And I wonder if you leave a league like the CFL, we saw the kind of split with fan bases and fandoms talking just the talks. I mean, does any part of this, if say we speculate they leave, is it guaranteed fans even follow? I don't completely see that being the case. I worry about ill will in that sense.
That's tricky to me. And there are a lot of, as you well know now, Zach, diehard 3-down CFL football fans in Canada that will stand up for the brand, even though some of the teams lose money and some people want to poke at the league and say it's second rate. And some people will say, it's not semi-pro football, all those kinds of things. They'll stand up and defend it. So when I hear, that the Argos might leave, they really have a core of diehard fans that are with that team. And I do have a really hard time seeing them maybe go down the QEW, the highway that connects Toronto and Hamilton, and cheering for the Tiger Cats, or maybe go a little farther down the road in a different direction, but to the nation's capital in Ottawa and maybe cheering for the Red Blacks. Perhaps they disperse and pick another team in the CFL and go that way. But they're diehard Argos fans. But if they had to cheer for them playing a 4-down brand of football on an American field, it just becomes so Americanized that I'm not necessarily sure if those fans will follow. There was the argument up here to say that if the entire CFL did enter into a partnership with the XFL and everyone was playing under a similar umbrella, that, you would still cheer for that team that you've cheered for potentially since you were a kid, or that you've grown up loving, or that you've come to love, maybe after your adolescent years. But the Argos question, if they did go to the XFL on their own, is very unique. And we really won't know until if it even happens.
True. And that won't even be for another at least year to 2 years. Again, part of it based on the XFL conversation, according to these rumors and what's been brought up, by Dan Ralph in one of these reports, reported again by Pro Football Talk, by the way, for those that are curious. So we got some time. It's still a little ways off even before that. And, for myself, that's great. It's kind of, to me, this is going to be in more of a background scenario where I'll be watching it it won't be like over looming on this season. But I mean, considering how much the Argos have redone their roster from everything I understand, at least it feels like they might be giving a good shot at saying, let's bring fans in, let's get the tickets up, and let's get to winning football again, to see if maybe we can make that other side of it work too. Then add on, of course, the developments with the single game betting and things of that nature that can help with the profitability.
Yeah, the Argos simply got to get fans in the building. Now, capacity limits are going to decide what that number is. And a lot of people will make the joke that, hey, it doesn't even matter what the capacity limit is for the Argos. They won't even be able to fill that reduced capacity. It's an old worn out joke, but it's fairly true about the Argos. I think they need to take the approach of the Edmonton Elks, right? They just announced that on the Labor Day rematch game, when Calgary travels up Highway 2 to Edmonton, that all fans 17 and under will get in free to that game. To be quite honest, if the Argos did something similar, maybe bump the age up a little bit to 24 years old, because there's a whole village over there, literally. The area, Zach, is called Liberty Village. It's like steps from where I am. I'm very close to BMO Field right now in downtown Toronto. And Liberty Village is like a stone's throw from BMO Field. And a lot of people walk right by it to go to Budweiser Stage, which has endless amount of concerts in a non-COVID situation every year. So tons of these young people walk by BMO Field all the time. They go there for the TFC games, the fans of that club at least, and it's under the MLSE umbrella. So I think if you just get some fans in the building and try to make it a fun atmosphere, don't focus it so much on the football, because you're getting the fair weather fan, right? Try that approach and see if in the future that leads to a connection, and then people actually showing up and buying tickets and, you know, souvenirs and hot dogs and beers and all those types of things. So I think the Argos are certainly looking to take care of that aspect on the football field. But I mean, you can go back to the Doug Flutie years when he was here in 1996, 1997, putting up all kinds of points and records and stats and yards and wins and Grey Cup wins. It didn't lead to the then Sky Dome selling out. So it's not just as easy as having a winning product. I really think that it would have been interesting to see if Johnny Manziel ever suited up for the Argos, because to me, that was a guy that moved the needle in Toronto. And I gauged that because a lot of my friends at the time that I played Canadian university football with were living in and around the city. And they started talking about Johnny Manziel in our group chats or when I met up with them. So if you had somebody like that, that was a recognizable name, that was a franchise foundational player, then I really think you could move the needle. But it's difficult because you obviously want to win and compete. And we know Johnny Manziel didn't have a successful run in the CFL. So I'm not saying bring him back, but you need somebody and really at that quarterback position. There was a rumor that, well, I shouldn't say a rumor, but it was legitimately reported, and we had it on DownNation, when Bo Levi Mitchell was a free agent a few years ago, the Argos threw a massive offer at him. He's a guy outside of somebody that is a big recognizable NCAA name or former NFL player that I think could have moved the needle here, because he's pretty cool. He's well-versed in the media. He's comfortable behind the mic. He could have moved the needle, but I really think it has to be somebody Johnny Manziel-esque that is recognizable to every football fan, not just CFL fans, not just hardcore football fans like yourself, but that goes beyond that, that is almost in the realm of, let's say, a sports celebrity. So to me, everyone thinks they have a fix for the Argos. Nobody's found it yet. I don't want to sound like an expert, but I think let some free people into the building, especially the young kids, and see if they get attached to the game.
If there's one thing I've learned covering many of these leagues, the hardcore fans will come. It's always about finding the people that want to say, I'm going because it's the cool thing that people are going to, or I'm going because it's the thing that, you know, that's where all my friends are at. The type of people that are like that, you know, you're talking the casual fan. You know, they know of it, but they are going because it's an experience. It's less about that I'm like a stataholic, or I'm super fan of the players, or, you know, I die by the Argos logo or something like that, or, you know, whatever team you follow in the CFL. You know, it's always the casual fan to me that I'm seeing, you know, whether it's the XFL, the AAF, or, you know, you name it, other leagues. You know, I mean, the CFL definitely has its base, but, you know, that's a challenge. Getting those people that aren't just the hardcore football is amazing in every way or shape or form type of guys to go to those games. So I imagine they'll have a challenge. Obviously, retooling the roster is great, which, speaking of retool, speaking of rosters, we got kickoff. You know, let's talk about some positivity. The kickoff's coming up. I mean, it's July 14th as we're recording. It's less than a month away. We're right around the corner. This is amazing, Justin. I've been waiting to hear about this. You know, let's talk about that. You know, what are you looking for in the season besides just, you know, playing football? What are you looking for that you want the CFL to accomplish this year?
Oh, that's a big question. I was going to go across every market real quick, but I think overall the CFL needs to come back in a major way and make an impact. There's a man out there, actually, and this just comes to mind naturally, Chris Bickford, who's trying to make a movie about the CFL and put it on Netflix and put the game in front of more fans. And he had some pretty creative ideas, and he's got Jake Plummer on board to star in that movie. Right. The idea is it would be called Kick, and it would be based, you know, in Hamilton with the Tiger Cat. So I really like that idea. Just get the game in front of as many people as possible, because to be honest, Zach, a lot of people in Canada will say, hey, you know, I'm cutting the cord and it's not really accessible, or they don't think it's worth it to pay for a whole month of the TSN live stream product just to get the CFL games. So I think they need to take the approach of just getting the game in front of people, like loosening off the restrictive deal that they have with TSN so they can just even get the viz out there, get the highlight clips on YouTube, on Twitter, on TikTok, wherever the heck all these young kids are. And, you know, a lot of us are on these platforms too. I mean, I'm mainly a Twitter guy, but just get the game out there, give them the snack, right, so that they want to come and try the meal. So to me, I think there are obviously an endless amount of marketing campaigns that you can do. But one of the really smart ones, you know, that I've heard and some people have said is, you know, compare some of the metrics that catch people's eye with NFL players. And not that the CFL is comparing itself to the NFL because it's a different game, but people have pointed out to me that Brandon Banks is comparable in speed to Tyreek Hill. All my buddies are falling all over themselves to draft Tyreek Hill in our NFL fantasy football draft. And Brandon Banks is, I would argue, just as a fun player to watch as Tyreek Hill. So do some of those things where you get the speed numbers, the power numbers of these players, just how athletic they are. Like we had a guy the other day, Shea Ross, a receiver for the Edmonton Elks, do a backflip while he dunked a freaking Oreo, man. Like that kind of stuff, for better or for worse, some people don't like it, but it went viral and it gets a level of respect for the CFL. So to me, there are many opportunities there, but I just think they need to make the game more accessible overall to get people back into it, because you mentioned it earlier. The hardcores are going to be there. They've been craving Canadian football for well over a year, obviously, since the 2019 season ended. And you got to get in this whole wave of people. So have a big marketing campaign, make it cool. Like one that really stuck up here was We the North that the Raptors rolled out a number of years ago. It really hit home with not just Toronto, but the entire country. And if the CFL can do something like that, a lot of people will say, well, they haven't rolled out a marketing campaign that people really could grab onto and get on board with since our balls are bigger or radically Canadian, right? Even Americans you talk to know about, and I'm sure you do. But since that time, the CFL has changed their logo. Some people hate it. Some people like it. Some people are indifferent. But let's get a marketing campaign that brings the whole country together and that people think is cool and that they can get into, and then at least makes people want to check out the game. I think there's a big opportunity here, and I hope the CFL takes advantage when they kick off in August.
Well, a lot of marketing has been the conversation, even just with the XFL CFL talks. So hopefully that's something that they do hit the ground running and that they're able to get to. And especially when you're off a year and a half, well, really 2 years, if you think about it, it's kind of hard, it's hard, I would say, to make sure that you are going to keep retained. Now, it sounds like season tickets for a lot of these stadiums, by the way, have been getting retention, at least for those diehard fans. So it's nice to see that. But I do think, like you're saying, marketing, I completely agree with you. You need to really be saying, hey, we're back. Let's play some ball. Let's get some action going. Who wants to go out and check out an Argos game? Who wants to go out and check out the Elks? We got new branding. We got that new logo on the field that's going in the opposite direction than I expected on the field. Still getting used to that, but that's fine. It's cool. Let's go check this stuff out. Get some marketing in there and make this a fun time. So that's a great way of putting it. Myself, it's easy to get me hyped up. I'm happy it's football, but obviously you're talking a slogan. Hey, why not go back to radically Canadian? That sounds great to me. We're talking, having as a Canadian game that fits right into our discussions the last year or so. Why not put that back out there? Get some ads or something going.
That's not a bad idea, actually. It works in the past. Why not go back to it? Say, we're going back to our history and our past and embracing this in our reboot. I like that idea, man. You should send that off to the league office.
Hey, if everyone's talking, the Canadian game, let's put that in there again. They already done it. Might as well go at it again. All right. I know you wanted to go through all the teams. Let's do this now. Give me a rundown. Give us listeners a rundown of what you're thinking with at least the 9 CFL teams right now. What are we looking at for the 2021 season?
All right, we'll go east-west, and I'll try to just hit on the sort of top hot topics for each team. So in Montreal, the Alouettes, signed a bunch of Frenchmen. I have nothing against them, but they're going to live or die, it seems like, with the Frenchmen and Kahari Jones, head coach, and Vernon Adams at quarterback. The key for them, Quan Bray, has finally gotten over the border after he had a marijuana charge, dealt with it in Montreal. Critical for them. The big key is, can they get after the quarterback? John Bowman, the Alouettes all-time leading sacker, has moved on from football. They brought in Almondo Sewell, who's an absolute beast, but there's question marks at the pass rusher spots, obviously at defensive end. I think they have some solid guys in the secondary, Greg Reed among them. But to me, that's a real critical factor for the Alouettes. It's the defensive line, getting after the pass, and also the offensive line, too. They lost Trey Rutherford, who was trending towards being a CFL all-star type guard. So got to find a way to fill his role. We go a little bit west to Ottawa. new head coach in Paul Lapalisse, the Red Blacks 3-15 in 2019, worst in the league, with an offensive coordinator by committee approach. And you have Lapalisse, who is widely viewed as the most creative offensive guru in the league. So can he help the Red Blacks win more than 3 games? It seems likely, but then a lot of people question the talent. He has Mac Nichols there at quarterback, who he spent a number of years with in Winnipeg, so familiar with the system. But Brad Sinopoli retires, who was one of the best Canadian receivers in the league. They have RJ Harris, who seems like he has the makings of a number 1 guy, but they need a supporting cast around them. Antoine Pruneau back on defense. He's a leader there, solidified, but it's a much different looking unit. And a lot of people are wondering if they'll get carved up again or if they can stop some opposing offenses. The Argos you touched on earlier, I won't go too much into it, but new head coach in Ryan Dinwiddie, whole new roster of players, quarterback there, Nick Arbuckle, familiar with Dinwiddie from their time in Calgary. But for me, how quickly can they come together? Because it's literally an entire new roster for the most part, an entire new coaching staff come together. And then you go just down the road in Hamilton and you have the reigning East Division champions, even though they won't like that title, were the favorites to win the Grey Cup, obviously got beat by Winnipeg, but everything for the most part is the same there. Orlando Steinauer, the head coach, returns, has brought back his entire staff. You have Jeremiah Masoli fully healthy, had lots of time to rehab that knee. He's looking light on his feet. I saw him live in person. Man, I'm telling you, he even slimmed down a little bit. He said about 5 to 7 pounds. That guy's on a contract year, as most players are in the CFL, but Masoli knows he needs to perform. I could see a CFL MLP type season coming from him. And he's throwing the ball to the reigning CFL MLP, Brandon Banks, who said he's muscled up a little bit and feels faster and as good as ever. That could be a dynamic duo, but it's a legit quarterback competition between Jeremiah Masoli and Dane Evans, aside from the money. Masoli got $125,000 up front. Dane Evans, no guaranteed money in his contract for 2021. On defense, Simone Lawrence leads that unit. They might have the best front 4 in the league. The key for them, though, can they replace Delvin Breaux on that short side corner spot? And we go to the West. In Winnipeg, I'll try to be a little quicker here. Zach Claros is back. New offensive coordinator in there, Buck Pierce. He'll have to put his stamp on the offense and prove that he can at least take over in some capacity for the void that Lapalisse left. And really the rest of that roster that won the Grey Cup, including Willie Jefferson, the reigning CFL most outstanding defensive player, is back. He's boasting about him and Jackson Jeffcoat being the number 1 pass rush tandem in the CFL. So you would imagine Winnipeg's going to be in the thick of it. To Saskatchewan, the Riders, the team that everyone loves to talk about in Canada as being the number 1 most followed team. Cody Fajardo trying to prove he's not a one-hit wonder. You got Paxton Lynch there, a former first-round NFL pick that a lot of people are going goo goo gaga over. But to be quite honest, I think we need to give him a little bit of time here. He seems like he's got the right approach to learning the Canadian game. He's not like Johnny Manziel saying he's going to come in here and dominate. You got Willie P in the backfield, William Powell running the rock, a near lock in a full 18-game season to rush for 1,000 yards, but he might be able to do it in 14 games. Shaq Evans is back looking spry. Kyron Moore could be an absolute breakout star. And if he has another dynamic year and goes over the 1,000-yard mark, probably guy's going to be in the NFL. But major question marks on defense. Charleston Hughes goes to Toronto after a contract impasse. They feel like AC Leonard can improve his production, but you need to find somebody at the other defensive end spot, especially after Chad Jeter retired and Freddie Bishop suffered an Achilles injury. And we'll get into that more a little later. But really their secondary is veteran laden, although the linebackers, you have question marks. Derek Moncrief, gone. Solomon Elamimian, gone. Cameron Judge, gone. Your 3 starters there, you got to find 3 new ones. And they thought they had a guy in Larry Dean, but he tore his Achilles too. Moving on to Edmonton, the Elks absolutely loaded on offense. Trevor Harris has gone through the TB12 method in the offseason, been training and eating. There's a picture making the rounds on the internet of him just looking cut up like Captain Canada or something like that, even though he's American. Leading that offense, Jamie Elizondo, a guy that he's familiar with, running that team now as the head coach. You got Darrell Walker there, Greg Ellingson, a bunch of targets. Armonte Edwards is another one. I don't think it matters who you have in the backfield running the rock, but they got James Wilder Jr., oh, by the way. And then on defense, some young stars. Vontae Diggs, a guy that I really like, burst onto the scene in 2019. And you have Kwaku Boateng, who I think is probably the favorite right now to win the most outstanding Canadian award, a guy that could get to double-digit sacks. Just down the road in Calgary, Bo Levi Mitchell. When that dude's healthy, Calgary competes. A lot of talk up here about, well, he doesn't have any receivers, and Eric Harris went to Toronto, doesn't have that number one guy anymore. Well, he's been training with Hergy Malai, who's a Canadian that he's really been talking up, Colton Hunchak, another little-known receiver right now out of York University here in Toronto, actually, was living at Levi Mitchell's house during the offseason, training with him in Calgary. So I really think it doesn't matter who you put around ball. As long as he's healthy, the Stamps are going to compete. On defense, there's going to be some new pieces there as well, but a veteran group in the secondary returns. So I think Calgary's going to be in the mix. And then out in BC, Rick Campbell finally gets to coach a game for the Lions. Mike Riley fully healthy after he broke his wrist. A lot of people might forget near the end of the 2019 season, but they got to protect him. They got to keep him upright. He took so many hits that season. It was surprising he made it as far as he did. The defense out there looks like it has the makings to be stout, and Campbell is a defensive guy. But I think really the key for the Lions is they got to find a way, and it sounds cliche, but they got to do it. Stop letting Mike Riley getting beaten up. So that's a quick tour around the league.
Nice. I'm tell you what, I'm impressed. And if any of you listening in didn't get something out of that, you might want to go and replay it, because that was pretty good. I would say good shotgun of each one of the teams right there, or at least a really good primer from Justin there. Thank you very much. Health is a big concern with any of the pandemic sports. It's funny, in the NBA, for example, we've been talking about how injury rates have gone up. At least that's something that had been a concern throughout the season. And before we even jumped on here, I had to, we were discussing what we were going to talk about. And one of the freak instances that happened, actually, while I was interviewing Dave Naylor, of course, before that, and you were talking about what we were going on here, is Saskatchewan, as you mentioned, a few players have at least what appears to be freak Achilles tears or injuries that happened within 4 of them within a 6-minute period, which kind of raises some eyebrows. I know the CFLPA were also alarmed at that instance of injury. Can you take us, what happened? What is it, a freak accident or just something that was not prepared for? What went down?
It certainly seemed like an anomaly. I'll take you through it sort of behind the scenes. When I got the information that 4 players had torn their Achilles before anybody else, at first I was like, is this real? Because it's never happened before, like, let alone in football. But Zach, in any other sport, 4 Achilles tears in this just short period of time. So, I break the news about Larry Dean tearing his Achilles, and I had already known that there were 3 other players, but it just seemed like something that wasn't believable. Like, there are rare occasions where you get a scoop or you get a story or someone lets you know about something where you're like, that can be real. It turns out this wasn't. Right. I just felt so devastated, right? Making the rounds and talking to the people connected to the players and the players themselves. You just feel for the guys because they've spent, over a year training for this season to finally get back on the field. And all of a sudden they're not even training camp, and boom, 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 boom. You have 4 Achilles and the guys go down. So Larry Dean, Nelson Lacombo, the 2nd overall pick in the 2021 CFL draft. Then you had Freddie Bishop, who's a former NFL defensive lineman, a guy that really would have been a core special teamer. And you had a running back, right now his name's escaping me, but from Western University, that went down as well, a rookie, and he was selected in the 2020 draft. Dude, that's going to kill me because I know his name. Jonathan Femi Cole, that's who went down. Those 4 guys doing a medicine ball drill where essentially each athlete who's participating, you make it a competition. You throw the medicine ball as high and far in the air as you can, and then you run as fast as you can. When it hits the ground, obviously that's the spot that you mark, and whoever gets the farthest wins the event, sort of thing. So this is ongoing and it's competitive and it's great to train, but the sequence of events to me is what really leads me to scratch my head, because head coach Craig Dickinson said after the injuries happened that he was notified of the first one, which was Larry Dean, by the way, by general manager Jeremy O'Day. Dickinson was working away in his office, at least according to the bench boss. Then O'Day calls him into his office and lets him know, well, it's actually multiple, and the number is 4. But in talking to people around the league, they unanimously said that after the first one, would you not at least go out on the field and check on your players? You weren't technically allowed to coach your players or oversee the workout, but you can go out there and watch. And in this instance, if a player gets hurt, you're allowed to go check on them. So when Larry Dean goes down, it's surprising to me that no one from the Riders front office or the coaching staff went out there and at least checked on what was going on when they heard the news. Now, maybe by the time they got out there, the other guys would have been done because it was such a short time frame anyways. But still, then people point names, and I'm not going to say who it is, but to the strength coach and say, hey, when you have one, you don't think a second one's going to happen, right? The second guy goes down. At that point, the drill should have been stopped, and you should have moved on to something else or just call it a day, because there's some bad juju or voodoo or whatever the heck you want to call it. Like, just end it right there. So there's a lot of talk behind the scenes of, is anyone going to take the fall for this? And should the drill have been stopped earlier? And a lot of people have told me around the league that that's exactly what they would have done. One is one thing, because that on its own is a bit of an anomaly. But when the second one happens, just stop it. We want to do a different drill or call it a day. But then in the back of, I'm sure, the strength coach's mind as well, he's not thinking that two more guys are going to go down with Achilles. You're probably thinking, okay, one, that's crazy on its own. Two is something nuts, like might as well buy a lotto ticket. But for four to happen, just unimaginable.
Yeah, hindsight, they say, is 20/20, but it's still, I myself, even if I was in that position, I cannot fathom that you're going to have that many in a quick succession. Really freak news is what it seems like. And also just a damn shame to hear about that. Like you're talking, you wait pretty much 2 years to get your chance to get back on a field, or you're drafted and it's your first instance to get out there. And this is what you get, at least in early season of or early training camp, really, is pretty much a season-ending injury for the most part. I mean, Achilles, it's a rough injury. I've never suffered one or a tear, but everything I've talked with players, or at least have read about them, they're harsh. It is a recovery process, no matter what sport you're in. And it's a damn shame to hear about that.
It is, man. Larry Dean went into surgery, I believe it was yesterday. So that would have been July 13th for people who need that reference, and getting it fixed up, planning on making a full recovery. But we well know, and we're not doctors, but it's a season-ending injury, especially in a shortened year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be rough. And that kind of makes, when I hear stuff like that's something I worry. Now, one side of the coin, you do get healthy players. Bo Levi Milcho, obviously, is one of the examples. Doesn't have to worry about dings. He got time off. He's going to be probably in a healthy state, one of the healthiest he's been since he's probably played in the CFL, going out there week one. But on the other side, as we're talking, that does probably put a damper of worries on at least the CFLPA or other entities about what other injuries could we see and how can we mitigate these, at least, possibilities. I imagine that came up at least as a post-incident type of discussion for other league officials and members.
It certainly was. And to his credit, Dickinson said that they had plans on day one of training camp to do some competitive drills, right? There was a one-on-one period that was planned for 10 minutes that they were going to do, but after the Achilles happened, he pulled back on it because he took the temperature of the team, felt like they were still in shock, and it was essentially just a walkthrough practice on day one of training camp. So there's been talk and various views around the league, and we can't forget either that Montreal had 2 Achilles tears as well. So it was like 6, yes, I believe, either the same day or 6 in 2 days, which is crazy in its own right, let alone just having one. But there definitely has been a heightened sensitivity to, hey, these guys are coming back, and you can train all you want in the gym and do all the sled pulls and, football drills that guys have been doing on their own, but you cannot replicate that competitive situation. Just like you cannot replicate what it feels like in the game to practice, right? That's why they call some players gamers. And, I've heard some smart people talk about this lately, and they say, football is really the only sport that you don't play at the same pace that you play in the game, because you're practicing against your own team, right? You want to get to the game on Sunday, but when you get in that game, it's ratcheted up to an entirely different level. All of the other sports you can play at, roughly the same level. Basketball, you can scrimmage. Yes, there's risk of injury, but it's not as high as football. Baseball, the pitcher's on the mound, obviously the guys are in the field, and all the other various sports. You're obviously not trying to injure your own guys either, even if you're having a soccer scrimmage. But football is just different, because in practice, it's not getting hurt through the week and getting to game day. So I've had some smart people say that to me. So there is some worry that, hey, when we actually get into game actions, are we going to see a rash of injuries? It didn't seem like it happened last year in the NFL, and right out of the gate, they played at a high level. So that had some people thinking that, hey, maybe the guys will be fresh. Maybe they'll be just raring to go, and they'll have been training so much, and they'll have an extended training camp that they could be super sharp, and we could see some really crisp football. And I think that can be the case, but there's also now some caution in terms of the injuries.
Right. To imply what you just kind of said with the crisp football, I know there's no preseason this year, but there is the extended training camp. Do you expect, like, as you're talking, you saw the NFL, how they handled it, at pretty much a no preseason beginning of their season last year. Do you expect the CFL to have a crisp start, or at least a somewhat crisp start where teams are at least in unison? Or are we going to be a little worried about maybe at least a pseudo sloppy ball for maybe the first week or so?
It depends on the teams, to be honest. So everyone's looking at that first game, and you referenced it a number of times. Ticats Bombers rematch, of the Grey Cup 107 in Winnipeg. Those two teams, largely the coaching staffs are intact. You obviously have the switch at offensive coordinator, Buck Pierce, though there, Paul Lapalisse out. And there are some new player faces, but overall, I think that game could be a really high level. But when you look at some of the teams like the Argos or the Red Blacks that have had a lot of turnover on their rosters and with coaching staffs and everything like that, that those are where maybe some of the sloppiness could come into play. But I get the sense overall that it could be sharp football. And then there's even some scuttlebutt around the league that, hey, the preseason games aren't necessarily revenue generators for every single CFL team. I have had people tell me that the Riders, obviously for them, it is, because they show up because there's only a small number of football games every year. That in Saskatchewan, it makes sense to have a preseason game. So maybe in the future, we don't have two anymore. Maybe we have one and just put it in those markets where we know it will thrive. That's to be seen. But this will be a test run to see, okay, what might happen in the future if football is played at a high level right out of the gate.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the season, Justin. And it's going to be a blast watching it over here in the States. Maybe not this year, but I've told you in the past, some point soon, love to get out there and check out a game myself too. Maybe not this year, next year, maybe seems more likely. For yourself, you have a game, your first one, what's it going to be? I imagine you'll be out maybe Hamilton or so.
Ooh. You know what? I haven't even thought of that yet. I've just been so focused on training camp. Yeah, there's been some, games we've sort of circled on the schedule that, we want to make sure that we're at. But yeah, I would imagine it's going to be, an Argos game. Ticats for Labor Day would make a ton of sense. It also kind of depends on my travel schedule as well. I do broadcast for the Canada West Conference up here, which is Canadian University football. So the University of Calgary, University of Regina, University of Saskatchewan, University of Manitoba, and the University of British Columbia, and I shouldn't forget University of Alberta are in that conference, so a 16 conference. So, more times than not, it seems like there's a CFL game in that city, the day before or the day after. So that's when I could see getting out west. But yeah, as you mentioned, in the GTHA, it'd probably be an Argos or Ticats game, or maybe when they play them on Labor Day, which is obviously a heated battle every year.
Yeah. Yes. Labor Day is definitely a looked forward to date. And that's something that one of the first things I looked up when trying to get into the league itself and getting interested was that Labor Day clash kind of just comes up. It's one of the first instances of like saying de facto game. You got to look out for that that weekend in particular. I want to end on a fun question. I asked this as well, or I've been asking other people too, and it seems to come up decently. And I just more want your thoughts on it. The Schooners still are brought up every now and then, at least that development. I know it's probably on pause for Halifax, but do you see that at least maybe, and this is speculation, your thoughts on this? I'm not asking for information, but if you do have it, that's great. Do you see it happening maybe 3 years down the road when things finally stabilize, we're past COVID type of talk and, getting on the way back to building up the team coffers?
I don't know if it's in that short of a term. I think it could be longer down the road, but the tough part is they're going to essentially have to start from ground zero. Not literally, but what I'm talking about is there's a new premier out there in the Maritimes, and Mike Savage, who was the Halifax mayor, was largely on board with it. But by the time that gets back to even being tabled and talked about out there, is he still the mayor, right? So there's been some turnover out there, and they had the $20 million that was contingent upon them getting the go-ahead from the province, but now that's all, fallen off the table. So they got to go through the whole process again. And the CFL is just going to be so focused on making the teams that they have now profitable. And what I think they really should delve into is single game sports betting and how much they can make out of that. Now, if they do it well and they bring in a ton of money, the more teams, the more games you have, the more revenue you can derive from it. So it would make sense to try to, reboot that idea of getting a team in the Maritimes, in the Atlantic, or in Halifax, wherever it might be, or whatever they might call it. It seems like it's going to be the Schooners, but it's really going to have to kind of go back to floor one and start working their way back up.
Time will tell. As you're talking, got to start building up at least a bit of the revenues there, focus on getting back to, concentrating on finding the profitability, as you're saying. And there are, as you've shown, talked and written avenues, and I'm looking forward to see how they can maximize that, at least in the next few years. Justin, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it. It's been a bit coming now. Obviously lots happened since we last discussed, and happy to have you on here, and happy that we'll be getting to watch football in less than a month. I'm looking forward to watching it and kind of getting your thoughts and maybe checking up with you later in the year.
You bet, buddy. Let's have a radically Canadian CFL season. You know what I'm talking about?
I'm saying, well, you and me, we'll be the front runners in pushing this. We'll get Ambrosi on the horn and say, hey, you got the slogan. Just push it back out there. Use it again. People will love it.
You still got this trademarks, guys. Come on, let's do it.
Right. What are you doing? get on social with it, man. Have a good one, Justin.
You too, buddy.
The Gridiron Gallery podcast. New episodes every Friday on your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and premiering first, as always, at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, only on unhingedsn.com.